First off, good morning, and thank you, Celina, for being on the Public Power Hour. My name is Jen Jantanapi-Chie, and I'm a member of the New York City DSA Eco-Socialist Working Group. Iapa, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Iapa. I'm also with the New York City DSA Eco-Socialist Working Group, and like all of us have been active in this pipeline fight. Celina, do you want to introduce yourself?
So, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and happy Indigenous Peoples Day. My name is Celina Trowell. I am a lifelong resident of Brownsville, Brooklyn. I'm also like a really new member of DSA by way of AfroSoc. So I'm just happy to be here with my comrades today.
Awesome, and thank you so much for being here today. My first question to you is, why should New Yorkers who don't live in these neighborhoods where this pipeline is being built, why should they be concerned?
Well, I think it's a human thing, right? And I think we have to understand our human connection and what oppresses one oppresses all, right? It's the same thing as racism, right? Nobody truly benefits from racism. And so I think the moment that we understand it, that any type of injustice essentially impacts how we navigate this world as human beings, it makes us less than and dehumanizes us all, then we're going to be like one step behind the fight. So once folks become activated or are aware, I think it's important for folks to do all that they can to understand and really truly, especially if you like nowadays you call yourself like an anti-racist or somebody that you consider yourself woke, right? Then it doesn't take it impacting you personally. It doesn't take it impacting your backyard for you to activate yourself and say something and do something about it. And I think that's been something for me that I hold personal. And I think just identifying as a Black woman, like the personal is political. So there really isn't no type of injustice I can see somebody go through or know someone is going through and not have something to say, feel, or do about it within my capacity. So it's important that people are aware that, somebody said something powerful, like at the pipeline rally, I believe the brother's name was Anthony Beckford. And he said, not all bullets come from guns. You know what I mean? And so if we're truly concerned about Black and brown lives, Indigenous lives, immigrant lives, those that are undocumented, then issues like this is an open playing field for everybody to activate themselves and be involved and speak up, speak out, and push back against this. Use whatever privilege they have to do something about it.
I want to highlight one thing you just said, where the personal becomes political. I want to ask you, can you think of a particular moment where something clicked in you to radicalize you and make you an activist?
So that's a question I've been thinking about a lot, actually, in terms of like when did it happen? And I don't know if I would go as far as to say like, I'm an activist. So I organize, like I've always done like in the community, but never professionally. It wasn't until my current job that I had the official title of organizing. I just always thought that it was important to make sure that the existence of power is in the hands of those who have been powerless for so long. And that was always very key and important to me. But in terms of radicalizing, I think it was always around me and I hadn't tapped into it. So I went to a very culturally responsive school, growing up. And then I had the opportunity to go to a high school for a short second, because I went to a lot of high schools, but for a short second. And that was probably one of the most profound moments in my life that I remember holding on to. We saw a film called Sankofa, because we didn't have American history. We have African American history. Like that was our core class in high school. And I saw that movie, and then due to some things happening, I couldn't stay at the school. But it was for years and years and years, it was always in the back of my mind, I need to see that movie again. Like something about it just stuck out to me, just understanding the whole idea of Sankofa. In order to move forward, you must first understand your past. And that stuck with me forever. And then finally, I think maybe my first year of college as a RA, I paid a ridiculous amount of money for the film because I didn't know it was a institutional film. So I finally got a copy of it. And that's when it for me, it was just understanding your history, identifying who you are in a space, existing and sitting in that is important. That's what you lead with first. And so I would probably say that first year of high school, it was just something shifted. You're seeing the world different. right after that was like the 9/11 attacks. So things like, I really start to see the world different, how I show up, how I exist in it. And from that moment on, I was just like, no. My very being has always been a political topic, right? Before I was even born. And so I have to carry that with me.
That's an amazing film. I'm so happy you saw that film. Very transformative. I remember seeing that in college. I recommend everyone check out Sankofa. My next question to you is, for those who don't know about it, what is the North Brooklyn Pipeline?
The North Brooklyn Pipeline is a cancer-causing mechanism that brings about fossil fuels into communities. And it's fracked gas. And for those that may not know, and I'm pretty sure the audience will know what fracked gas is, but for those who don't, and in like the most basic sense of the word, it's drilling, high-powered drilling into the earth that creates these earthquakes that then releases, and you're able to liquefy and compress gas, like these natural gases, but it's high in methane, it's cancer causing, it pollutes the ground, it pollutes the earth. And most of the time it goes through communities because it's so dangerous and they're aware of the dangers and poisons, the radioactive poisons that exist in this. It goes through communities that are often very high dense, low income, Black, brown, indigenous, immigrant, undocumented, purposefully, right? And it's all by way of racial capitalism, you know? And so they go through, and most of these communities that are impacted by it, which they would, they deem them sacrifice zones, they don't benefit from it, right? We know there's a huge carbon footprint in this world that's threatening, and pushing forward the climate change. And I think enough people understand the dangers of having to do anything and all things they can to reverse this carbon footprint, and exposing communities to natural gas, fossil fuels, fracked gas. It's all the same thing. They'll try to use fancy words and switch it around to confuse people, but it's all the same thing. Natural gas is fracked gas, i.e. fossil fuel, right? It has to be stopped, right? And so we have to really be intentional about how we slow down and shift and pull away our dependency on natural gas, right? Because at first it was like coal. Coal is a bad thing. We've discovered natural gas. Now, how do we shift from this natural gas that has honestly made folks billionaires? You know what I mean? Like that's really the giant that we're fighting against. How do we push back, right? Because we know once you get rid of one poison, they'll find another. But for now, we fight this one.
I wanted to bring in some of your background. I know you are a central organizer and leader of Occupy City Hall. How does the pipeline and its environmental racism that you mentioned relate to the values of occupation? I know you mentioned radicalized capitalism and National Grid as a builder of this pipeline.
Yep. So yeah, it is. It's National Grid who's behind this. And when we talk about how that played a part in, or how that connects to Occupy City Hall, in which we demanded that there be a defunding, a true defunding of the NYPD's budget, and a true investment into communities, such as these resources meaning education, food sovereignty, like also healthcare, drug user health, right? All those things, right? That for decades, when we look at it, those things have been defunded in our communities for decades. And then we're gaslit to believe that somehow we're the ones doing something wrong when we lack the resources. Or we're gaslit to believe that we got to do better, we got to help. Well, with what, right? If you take all the tools out of the toolbox, then with what? And then, further gaslit to believe that somehow proximity violence is unique only to certain communities, when it's not, after you set up this system. And so in terms of really saying, we're in a state where we have 118, 119 billionaires, and then we have an NYPD budget, a military budget really, in our state that constantly abuses, maims, and murders and executes people every single day. We really have to look at the parallels and complexities and connections of this, once again, being a form of that type of institutional racism, that institutional violence against people and communities that we're seeing with environmental racism. It is the same. right? It's the same people that benefit from this. And then they use the same military to enforce this, right? When we think about our brothers and sisters in other places along the country, right? They're fighting against a military to defend what's theirs, to defend what's their right. And so it's the same here. We called for occupation to demand that, number one, people really take a look at what's happening with their budget. They have one of the biggest budgets in the nation, and saying, why do they need that? And they still have not, one, stopped crime, right? And it doesn't stop their bullets from killing us either. And so we really have to, the demand, which was confusing at first, was real, I think, for some people who either willfully or unwillfully didn't realize it, was we wanted to set the minimum of defunding by $1 billion, a minimum, right? And then when you have a minimum that all folks can agree on, then we can really start to open the door and have a platform to talk about how do we disarm? What does abolishing look like? Like essentially we all need to get to a place of abolishing the military system, i.e. the police. But we also understand that doesn't happen overnight, and that takes critical relationship building with one another to be able to exist and be able to have the capacity to undo harm to one another. And we know that, right? But again, it starts with making sure we have the money and the funding for the resources, right? Why do we have a high asthma rate in our community? Like in Brownsville, we have one of the highest asthma rates. And it's because we don't have adequate health care, right? So fund healthcare in our communities, fund proper rehabilitation of the public housing, right? There's still lead paint in some of these apartments, right? So we need to invest in our communities. And when you're telling us that there's no money elsewhere, you're lying. We have a police force that can't even stop crime.
That's right. You also mentioned funding, and you're right. All these operations are funded by some kind of apparatus. So my next question to you is, in regards to the North Brooklyn pipeline, can you tell us who is funding this particular project?
Yeah, so my understanding is National Grid, right? And all players and stakeholders look like Con Edison, look like PSCs. If you want to go further up, all stakeholders look like elected officials who are allowing it to happen even, right? So I believe that they're all the culprits behind this. They say one thing, yet do another or allow another in communities. And I think that's the thing we're fighting here. Our community, our Brownsville community, or the community that's along the route of the North Brooklyn pipeline, is no different from the other communities that were able to effectively stop the Williams pipeline that earlier this year. And so we want to be heard, and we want to be put on record that we don't want this in our community. And if you can stop it there, you can stop it here. And if it's so serious that you need to find your money through drilling and poisoning communities, then do it in your own backyard, not ours.
And also, don't pass on the cost of this infrastructure project on the people themselves being poisoned by this project, right?
$185 million over the next 4 years we'll have to pay. All while we'll still be struggling from medical bills from COVID-19, right? And already existing medical bills, loss of income and housing. And we somehow have to cough up $185 million for them to justify keeping our homes warm in the winter.
I also find it really unacceptable, especially since people are already struggling to pay their utility bills. People have been hit so hard financially because of COVID, and people are struggling to pay rent, pay for food, pay for utilities, bills to Con Ed, to National Grid, and then National Grid is going to add on another $185 million to the backs of those people. Could you tell us a little bit more about what phase of the construction we are in right now with this pipeline, and what is the timeline?
So I can only speak from my understanding is with phase 1, which is in Brownsville. They have permits up until actually like the next 4 days. So I don't know what happens once the 16th hits. That's where they'll be, I guess, wrapping up. And to be clear, the Brownsville community had already had, my understanding, the existing infrastructure for these pipes. So the way they tried to sell us a good lie on 2 feet was that they were upgrading the current infrastructure. Well, all the while they were just upgrading it to ensure that it was functional to connect to the other portions, phase 2 pipeline. And so that's how they kind of snuck it under folks, that they asked questions. Oh, we're just upgrading. This was already here. We're just upgrading it a little. And it's like, but you're upgrading it. You're connecting it with something, right? And so my very good assumption is that once this is done, the upgrade in Brownsville is done, they move forward. Phase 2 is already in the ground. Phase 3, I believe, is already in the ground. They'll begin construction in phase 4 and phase 5. However, none of this can work without the other piece. So it's critical that we're able to stop it at whatever point of the process altogether, because it won't function without the other part. So right now they have been working, I think, in overdrive in our communities, overnight, 24-hour days, leaving generators on for extended periods of time to try to hurry up. And I think too, thankfully, after seeing the communities facing opposition, they know that they will not be able to work there and just kind of like wave. It's just like people are now grilling you because they know what you're doing now, and you have to face the community. And so, it seems like they've been trying to speed things up to get out of everybody's face. But just because you get out of our face does not mean we're going to shut our mouth.
Celina, can you tell us more about how you got first involved in this fight, as well as, the work of the Brownsville Resident Green Committee?
Yeah. So a good friend of mine, my brother, Cardine Lewis Allen, he had notified us. So I'll back up. Like, Cardine and I are both part of the Ocean Hill Brownsville Coalition of Young Professionals. And we are a group of committed community members and residents who pretty much are here to combat the brain drain, like never in, never will, right? So all of our skills, education, whatever, we want to bring back into the community and make sure that Brownsville is a place to work, live, and thrive and be viable. And so I'm not sure how he found out about it, but I think it was at the time where other communities were still activating and doing like bike rides and things like that. And one of the tenets of CYP, what we call ourselves for short, the Ocean Brownsville Coalition of Young Professionals, is environment, right? So we were always interested in environment. We even have our community garden, right? And so we understood and identified environment as one of the things that Brownsville needs to be intentional about in order for our community to thrive. And so when he said, hey, like, there's a pipeline in Brownsville, I said, and no, like impossible, because I understand the visceral reactions I have to seeing so many people fight this pipeline across the nation. So for it to happen, like in our, right up under my nose, it was like painful, physically painful. And so from there, he connected me with the group that had been involved, that had been informing or doing their best to inform residents about it, right? Like on the ground, that's the thing. Like, hey, do y'all know this is going on? And first, like, why? First of all, we too tired. We got a lot going on right now. It's like, but no, like if you have any ounce of effort to look into this, and so it was a few of us people that really started to come around and understand, like, this is crazy, insane, disgusting that it's happening. All these things that I already knew, but it was the education piece of sharing, which with your community family. And from there, we started to meet a little bit more regularly, be a little bit more intentional about informing our neighbors and community members about it. And then from there, we said, well, I guess we kind of need a name, right? And so, so people understand who is a group of people, or who can they reach out to or be connected to. And that's how the Brownsville Residents Green Committee came about, so that it just legitimized the community in terms of their efforts of stopping or pushing back or having opposition against this pipeline, right? Because I think just with the political climate, one of the interesting things that can happen or just be done, especially with like the racial uprisings, is this idea that it's not really the community saying these things, and it is, right? Like the Black community, the Brown, like we care about environment too. It's not just when there's gun violence. We show up. If we have the critical information, if we know, if we're educated, then we will show up and we will say something. And specifically the Brownsville community, we have came out of radical opposition and fight for decades in our history as the Brownsville community. And so when you let us know, or we're aware of something, there's those who will say and do something about it. But people have gotten complacent and assume that we don't have mouths to be heard. And so I think that this moment in this movement also sees a unique opportunity for people to realize, oh, we don't just be cry, when bullets don't come from other places other than guns, and I think that's a beautiful essence for our community to get back to, and for the world to see and understand about us.
I saw the amazing turnout at the Brownsville rally, and it was so powerful. As so many people from the community had said, had the community been more informed and National Grid more transparent, this would not be happening. My next question to you is, how will this pipeline impact the communities surrounding it? And what does environmental justice look like for you and your community?
You know, we say over and over again because we mean it, like we have one of the highest asthma, you know, hospitalization rates, you know, in the city, you know, just in Brownsville alone. We were, you know, parts of our history is being an industrial community, right? So we have had, you know, decades and legacies of plants and factories literally embedded, some of them still existing on the outskirts of our community, right? And so this has been passed down, you know, from the inception of the public housing, the lead paint, and all those things that we still struggle with to this day, just poor health, and COPD, right? And those things. And so being able to, unfortunately, having access to something as deadly as that can cause cancer, that can increase the carbon footprint in the air, in the ground, in your waters, destroy the green spaces that we do have, right? Where we're constantly battling against how do we remediate the lands there, you know, is detrimental and is devastating. And I don't think it's something that we would see in this generation, but maybe even the next and the next after that, right? So this is like a slow death that's happening in our communities. But we have, and I don't think that, I think this is this perception or this idea that just because you don't see the effects or you can't really name the effects or tie it directly to it, this is what it comes from. You know what I mean? Like, and so we have to really just be active in terms of how we address environmental crises that happen, especially in our community. And so in terms of environmental justice, what does that look like? I don't feel like I am the one to say or name what it looks like for a community. What it looks like for me is an intentional activation with community, not over community, not under community. I always speak of like power, and it's not power over and not power under, it's power with. And being able to have the community at the forefront of saying, of reimagining what this looks like for them, reimagining how they want to be involved in shifting the carbon footprint in the community, how they want to be involved in making the shift to renewable energy. What does it take, right? For those that really have no option, that are really, really dependent on natural gas. That's something we have to hold that complexity. Our community has not been given, you know, options of electric stove versus like gas stoves. You know what I mean? Like, so this is something we were brought into with little to no options and a dependency on it. And what does it take for that person who depends so much on it, the communities that depend so much on natural gas, to make a shift towards renewable energy? And so that's environmental justice, having the conversation, being fully engaged and understand, and also being able to give all the facts, right? Like not just piecemeal, because I think that there is an importance to understanding and holding the complexities of being dependent on something that's killing you, right? That's capitalism. And being able to open yourself up to that vulnerable space and name and envision what your future looks like is a power nobody can take from you. And I think it's something that our radical imagination is something that has been defunded, disinvested, stolen from us in so many ways that we forget how to reimagine the next phase of something. Because all we can think about is how bad we depend on something right now and in the moment, which is too very important. But what are you living for, right? We can't just exist in this moment. We have to live for something. And so to me, that is environmental justice. Clean air, renewable energy, sustainability for us, you know what I mean? Then others, but for us, because it's about our survival, honestly. So why not us, you know? And we should be unapologetic about that.
So building off of that, what do you think is a common misunderstanding that you've encountered from people that might be supporters of the pipeline? And what are some talking points that National Grid has used to sway people over to this effort?
What I've encountered initially was this isn't a pipeline. It's like that. It is in fact a pipeline. Do you know what pipes are? It's a 40-foot wide pipe. 40-inch wide pipeline. It's a pipeline, and gas is going through this, and that gas is fracked gas. You know that has cancer-causing elements, radon, and all of the sorts. And I'm aware that National Grid has attempted to not use pipelining until they've slipped up. I'm aware that they are saying that the communities or the commercial bids will somehow benefit from this, when in fact they have went and asked for permits to transport this gas through these pipelines to other places and possibly out of this country, right? So that's something that we need to myth bust, that we will not benefit from this. And none of that, again, no matter what, really, none of it justifies the rate hike that we'd have to experience for this, right? And we didn't ask for it. And then another thing about this is that, that there's no risk to having these pipes under your feet. And they don't tell the community about the leaks that happen, the quiet leaks that happen when FDNY just shows up to a corner and try to resolve gas leaks in the community. The day of the rally, there was a couple of hours before the rally, when we actually made it to the site, there was a gas leak, a 20-inch gas leak right there on Linden Boulevard. That same day, you can't make that up, that our community was exposed to poisons, right? It didn't have to take its time to seep up under our feet and into the soil and into the grass that our kids play in. It was right there for us to breathe in, right? The explosions that happened, right? Like earlier in Brooklyn, there was an explosion where about, I think, almost 20 workers got hurt, right? Like, are they aware of the risk that they're putting themselves in, the leaks and explosions that happened in these communities? And so we have to be vigilant, and we have to ask the questions, all the questions, and never be ashamed. Even if you got an answer and you walk away, go right back, because people try to shame you to saying, well, you didn't have all the information to ask all the questions at that moment. You go right back. Hey, I thought about something. Let me ask you this. Is it true? Or this is what I looked at and this is what I found out. We have to be vigilant, and we have to remember our power, right? We have to always just get back to our people power. Because it doesn't matter when you found out, it's what you do once you know. So I think those are immediate, what I can think of my mind, misconceptions I heard, people try to share with me. Well, it's not really this and it's not really that. It's all lies, right? And you must know the full story, the full history of these things, and be able to ask questions, and not be afraid to take your time with it either. If you don't know, you're new to it. It's all right. It's all right.
And in regard to public power, what can the community do to protect themselves from this pipeline? And what do you think is essential for making sure this pipeline does not get finished?
Essential is people. That's one, right? That's just me, right? Essential is people and education, always. And in terms of how we can educate ourselves, it's finding that organizing base, that activating base. And it's, I'm happy that we now have a little name, like the Brownsville Residents Green Committee, being able to tap in to that, right? We have a Twitter. So if you look up Bville Green, right, that's our Twitter handle. You can also email us at brownsvillergc@gmail.com. And we're trying to cultivate that space to be made up of residents, community members, and those tied to the community, even business owners, to have the tools they need to fully educate themselves and be able to share and educate, right, other people and spread the word. Also in understanding politically, what does it look like? Who are the people? What are the entities that we need to talk to apply pressure on, to call out, to call in, right? In order to get this pipeline stopped, right? Because once you have the education, right, then it's time to activate. And so you have to understand how to activate and agitate if necessary, right? And so the Brownsville Residents Green Committee is a great homegrown place to begin that journey. And then who's helped us along the way has been the No NBK Pipeline Coalition. Those were the folks who came and said, hey, you know, there's something going on. And so they have been awesome in providing us their resources and privilege to be able to uplift our community, right? And I think that's the beauty of like allyship and having accomplices, right? And just knowing your place in your role, right? And being able to utilize that. And again, nobody has the right to tell you when to utilize it and when not to, right? To benefit. And when it comes to people power, there's always a space for it and a place for it. And there's no elite group that should hold on to that right to do it, you know?
Celina, you've talked about political leadership a bit, and I want to go into that a bit more. Early in 2020, Mayor Bill de Blasio publicly committed to ending fossil fuel infrastructure in New York City, but obviously he has failed to halt the construction of the North Brooklyn pipeline. What advice do you have for navigating the balance of putting pressure on the city's leaders while still focusing energy on direct action? Are there any times where you've seen this happen with other work?
Every day. I think every day as an organizer professionally, you are let down in a sense by people, you know, or elected leaders' idea of progressiveness and how they pick and choose. And I think you have said something at some point, like, how do you, there is no pick and choose, right? It's, while folks may not, or entities may not have the capacity to do it all, you must hold all complexities. And I think this is a situation in which you hold all complexities. And he even went as far as releasing like an executive order in February, right, of saying there will be no expansion of it. And so in terms of holding elected officials accountable, you have to remind them. And I think too, after you've reminded them, and it's not saying like they forgot, because they don't forget, but you do your job in reminding them, right, just out of good faith. And then it really boils down to, once you know that they know and they're aware, fully aware of it, then what is it really about? What is it about the Bushwick and Williamsburg and Brownsville community that you are still allowing this to happen after you're saying that this is wrong, right? And so it's one, writing the letters, it's, you know, being active on social media, it's holding the teach-ins, it's doing the direct actions, it's holding all the complexities, right? Like, not everybody can do everything, right? But you identify your strengths and you do your best to spread yourself out, because you have to tackle it all at once, right? You have to tackle it all at once. It's, for example, with the uprisings that have been happening in this past year, which I it's disheartening yet exciting, because it shows me that people are like, no, you can no longer be comfortable, right? We cannot return to normal. Normal was killing us, right? And so it takes people going to the street. It takes people popping up on a block that has built itself off consumerism and taking your money back, right? Like, it takes all of those things. It also takes going to the voting booth, right? It takes going to the ballot, you know, like, and really looking at who your local leadership is and voting them out or holding them accountable. And so it doesn't just stop with the city. It's a state thing, right? We know Governor Cuomo with a signature can stop this thing. And so what's up with our state leadership as well?
I think it's good to have those reminders with elections coming up and with a whole new city council coming in next year.
Oh yes. And, you know, like, again, for me personally, like, to be very clear, like, I have that's their job, right? Like, and I have a job. My job is holding my elected leadership accountable, period. Like, that's it, right? It's power with. You're not supposed to have power over me and tell me how to do this thing. You're not supposed to to like have power under me. It's power with. We put you there so there can be a co-governship of what our people in our communities need. And so that's why I think, if anything, when people say, oh, there's no hidden agenda in wanting to see your community be great. There's no hidden agenda in wanting to make sure your community is healthy enough for your son. There's no hidden agenda. The personal is political. And I think we have oftentimes fell asleep or have gotten to a space of, I'll see you off and I'll never ask how your job is again, even though every day your job impacts my life. That's impossible for the assume I have nothing to say about what happens to my life, you know? And so it has to happen, right? City council, mayor, everybody needs to get put on notice. Everybody needs to get put on notice, period.
So let's imagine that we're successful and the pipeline is shut down. What comes next in your eyes?
What comes next for me, I think, because what came to me initially, well, I stumbled, was probably taking a closer look at how infrastructures and corporations have been showing up in our community, right? We're talking about like the Con Eds, right? Like, I think for like the last 2 years, we were like close to like a brownout. And why was that? Like, why were you turning our energy down? Why? Like, what was that about, right? So, and I think too, just how do we continue to hold spaces accountable when we look at urban renewal in communities, like especially like in Brownsville? What are you doing with our empty lots? Is it really affordable, and for who? When we still have food deserts, right? We still don't have youth centers that aren't necessarily tied to the police, right? So what are we doing? And I think that's what allows us to really open the door for the next step. So if, like, for example, like the Brownsville Residents Green Committee, our community board, you know, our gardens, you know, like how do we really come together and cultivate the space to ensure that by a certain year, NYCHA has solar panels, right? It's not enough for you to render it and get awards for it somewhere in some fancy development. Like, when is it going to happen, and how, right? And so I honestly, personally, I would love to see like some energy around, because we have the largest concentration of public housing in the 11212 zip code in the, I want to say, the city. We have the most housing projects. And so if a large portion of our community exists as residents for generations as residents here in our communities, then number one, we can understand why the accident rate is up, right? Right? It's just been historical, the fact that we have been a historically industrial community, having some of the oldest historical nationwide factories in our neighborhood, right? That have literally, you know, sustained the nation in many ways. How do we really look at a renewable NYCHA, right? Like, I think that'd be dope. It's not enough to talk about it and draw fancy renders about it, but like, what actual actionable steps are we taking to shift towards that? I think would be awesome.
In your opinion, how do we organize not just Brooklyn residents or Brownsville residents, but all New Yorkers to be mobilized against infrastructure projects like this one?
So I immediately tap into or get connected with like some of the groups I had mentioned earlier, the Brownsville Residents Green Committee, and our Twitter account, and or just get on our email list, because we will continue to have community action calls about this, to have folks tap into and engage. No MBK pipeline is great. Sane Energy is great. Fracked out of BK is amazing. You know what I mean? DSA, working groups, Socialists. Like, so there's many groups and spaces for folks to tap into, right? I don't know them all. I'm not going to act like I do know them all. But what would be necessary, I think, to truly have a sustainable activation around this is, how are we putting this into our school curriculums, right? How are we engaging in this in our community board meetings? And being truly like critical about it too, right? Because even if it exists, nobody should be able to just show up in your neighborhood with a fancy presentation. You go, ooh, ah, and they sell you, right? But how do we, again, become really critical thinkers and engagers in our community around what's happening and what's going on? It's important. And I mean, I think that may not be enough, but that is what I could initially think of now. I can only just speak to how I was activated. It was word of mouth. It was something I cared about. And I think just to even say, like, it shouldn't have to be experiencing or witnessing a trauma of others to care. But I don't know sometimes what it takes, right? Like, the uprisings have happened because the world witnessed a trauma that we have been saying for decades has existed. And unfortunately, that's what happens, and that's what activates people. And I wish we lived in a world where that didn't have to be the case, but that we just understood that no parts of our existence should be subjugated, and that anything that experiences an injustice is an injustice to your entire being and the human race. But again, that's a, again, for me personally. But I think, as cliche as it is, it starts with the youth. How do we educate them, build them up on being aware of these things, speaking about why it's important to be into recycling. Something as simple as that. People who know me do not litter around me. Like, I hate it. Like, I can't stand it. If I try to take a jump shot at a little garbage can, and I miss it from my car. I park my car and I go out and I pick it up like that, because as an individual, you benefit the collective, and you have to know your individual power in that. So, start with the babies.
Celina, I'm so honored to be with you in this fight. I've learned so much from this hour alone, and I'm so honored and grateful to be in connection. You're amazing, and thank you so much, Celina.
No, I never get over my nervousness with these things. It's fine.
Oh my God.
You killed it. Oh my God.
You are phenomenal. I learned so much, and yeah, definitely eager to support more work on the ground in Brownsville. I'm over in Bushwick, but yeah,
we
very
here.
close by.
We cousins.
Yes.
It's all good.
Thank you so much, Celina.
Thank you, Celina,
Thank
so
you,
much.
Jenny. I appreciate you both. Thank you for
Of course.
holding it down, the work that you do.
See you in the
Absolutely.
battlefield, right? See you
Yes,
in the
see you
ground.
soon.
Absolutely. 10 toes down. Appreciate y'all.